That's a huge accomplishment. I hope you all enjoy your day off tomorrow and use it smartly, wisely, healthfully.
Just have fun.
That, good. And also to our middle school students for their completion of their first semester and their first round of parent conferences. I hope you found it as a good chance to revise and assess your goals and set your eyes forward. So snaps to all of our students. Tough to get through the first half, but we are proud of you. Go ahead.
Perfect timing. So mine, if you were monitoring Seacoast Online or our Facebook page, we had a student who was recognized as a male athlete of the week, Charles Timmons, who's on our unified basketball team. So it was a great for Charles, and then in addition to that, also wonderful recognition for unified programs that we have. Not just, I came from a district where unified basketball was the sole unified program that we had, and that was a program that always brought me great joy at the tail end of each year. And here in Portsmouth, we have a variety of unified programs, but it was awesome to see Charles get recognized, and congratulations to Charles.
That was a great article, by the way. Any other announcements and recognitions at this time? Oh, all right, so then let's move on to the acceptance of the January 10th regular meeting minutes. Do I have thank you, Anne, a second? Brian? Any discussion on those minutes? Oh, okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great,
I'd
motion.
like to abstain, I wasn't present at the meeting.
Okay, so we have, well, we don't have Nancy yet, no. So 6 in favor, 1 abstain, 2 absent. Okay. Do I have a motion to open public comment?
So moved.
Okay, Pip, followed by Brian. Do we have no one in our large audience? Is there anyone, no one on the sign-up forms? Do we have anybody online?
We have 2 people, but they haven't said anything.
If you'd like, if you are online and would like to make a comment, please raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you. Okay, at this moment, I'd like to close public meeting. Do we have a motion? Motion, Carrie, followed by Lisa.
For
Thank
public
you.
comment.
For public comment. That's the new policy by the New Hampshire School Board Association.
And do we vote on
You
each
don't
of
have to
us?
vote, you just have to
motion.
open it and close it.
Okay.
Yep, because if we have to open it again at the end, it can't be open the entire time.
Gotcha.
Okay, that moves us on to the public hearing section on fiscal year '24 budget, which is a separate public commentary section. So if there is anybody in our Zoom audience that would like to make a comment with regards to the fiscal year '24 budget, we will take those comments now. And if you would like to, please raise your hand so we can acknowledge you. No? Okay, and we have no one on our sign-up sheet. So I would just remind folks that if you would like to use your representative school board to share thoughts with before our next school board meeting, that is a appropriate venue you can use for raising comments.
And I would offer that we reopen our public hearing on Valentine's Day.
That's right.
Conveniently enough, so that folks can choose to do that instead. We anticipate that we'll be in chambers that night, and we'll reopen the public hearing in case there's any further comment from the public.
And just to be clear, that's the last public hearing
Yes.
comment period for next year's budget. Yep, okay,
And we might get a couple of people. but-
great. Okay,
Recording in progress.
is that me? Sorry. Gotcha. I'm with you now. Okay, thank you. So at this point, we can move on to our superintendent's report.
So you have the couple of summary pages for you. One is just email correspondence summary, we talked about this last meeting, how we're going to move to a summarization of the emails the board collectively receives. And this one was not entirely unusual, just that somebody had an email and they were looking for a school in Portsmouth, Virginia. And we've done the UK earlier this year. So that was the sole email to the board as a collective during that period that Paulette accounted, which is through the 17th. And then second one is just a summary. My understanding, this has been an ongoing thing while the approval process comes through the superintendent's office, that as a courtesy to the board, we've provided a summary of trips, overnight trips, that folks are going to be on, and this represents ones that we've approved up through the last cycle. Yeah.
I'm not sure when the cutoff date is, but I did receive, and I think it went to the whole board.
It was one about class size?
About
Yeah,
about
I was thinking the same
class
thing.
size. It was on the 19th, so that is, I don't
Yeah.
know if that's
So this is,
in. But can we address that? Were you copied on that? Are you familiar? with that?
I saw a copy of it. I don't,
I have it here. It's regarding the class size of
Dondero.
Dondero of 20 students. I know the max by state is 25 for kindergarten, but 20 students, but that we normally do try to keep to 20 or lower if we can in our classes. That's what historically we've aimed for. So I just wanted to address it because I think it may have been prompted by my question that I asked in our last meeting regarding, we were talking about expansion of a building, not necessarily expanding classrooms. So I
yeah.
think there could have been some confusion in listening in on the meeting, but
Sure.
there wasn't a need to expand the building with numbers that we have right now or redistrict at this time. But there's been no request for additional classroom teachers. So are we
Right.
trying to stay at 20, or if we end up bumping past that in schools, especially at the elementary level, will we be trying to hire, or how are we approaching numbers?
So I think the question, the approach, the way in which we've been talking about it is about a redistribution of teachers. How would we redistribute across grades?
Okay.
First, within buildings, and if we had to go beyond buildings and redistribute
Okay.
across buildings.
Okay.
That's where we're at the moment.
Okay.
But I'm happy to have a more detailed response to that specific email, which I wasn't ready for today.
No, that's fine.
In
I
a
just
future
was
meeting.
curious.
But that's we would start with redistribution.
Okay, but the goal still it has been historically trying to stay around that number of 20 at younger? Is that
I
what
think
we're
that's
still
good, but
looking at
I haven't
for
put that as a
future,
hard,
or-
I haven't in this cycle, I haven't put that as a hard cap
Right,
on people
I
saying you
understand
can't go beyond, X number of students. Part of this too is around kindergartens. What's challenging is we find out very late about kindergarten, so it's also trying to anticipate what's going to happen with kindergarten students. So it'll be interesting to see where we're at in the fall.
Okay,
Yeah. But I'm happy to come back with a more detailed response.
okay. Or even respond to the person in general. I don't necessarily need an additional response.
Yep. And you went through the overnight field trip memo.
Thank you.
Do you want to go through the correspondence letters that we have in the packet?
So, you have several requests for.
We're at the,
Yep. So, you have I have a letter of resignation and a letter of retirement from two employees. Ali Frawley, who's been serving in a case manager role at Portsmouth Middle School, has put in a request that was that for her, we was effective yesterday to resign her position as a case manager at Portsmouth Middle School. And then we also received a letter of retirement from Nancy Moore, who has served in the district for coming up on 40 years, almost, for Nancy, in an adapted PE role. And she'd be retiring effective the end of this school year.
So do I have a motion to accept these two letters in our, we can do them as a group, right?
So, yep, if someone moves that way. in
Yeah.
seconds.
Carrie?
Second.
Second. Hope. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great, motion passes.
Great, thank you.
Margot, could I just say something? I think if you're gonna take a vote and people are on Zoom, you need to do a roll call vote. Am I
Oh.
correct about?
Yep, all right,
And
let's
that's, I
take,
think,
so,
is any
yep,
discussion.
let's take that back, okay? So we have a motion to accept the letter of resignation and the letter of retirement. So, Dr. McLaughlin, if you could take a roll call vote.
Sure. So Liz Barrett, Pip Clues,
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport,
Yes.
Ann Walker,
Yes.
Margaret Peabody,
Yes,
Nancy Clayberg.
Yes, and I'm supposed to say that I am not there because I'm on Zoom. I'm in Florida, and I am in a residence in Florida, and my 3 children are with me, but they're not in the room with me at this time. And my vote is yes.
Hope Van Epps,
Yes.
Ryan French,
Yes.
and Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Great.
any discussion? Great. Okay, so Nathan, we'll turn it over to you for the administrator report on this month's financial.
It's a full agenda, and in deference to that, and the fullness of every night, I'm providing you a memo each time. I hope that that's providing some greater insight to target some things. A lot of it's repetitious, month after month. I'm trying to change some of the words so that it wouldn't read exactly the same, but I think the biggest takeaway is, Andrew and I are still, you met Andrew the other day, timing. Mr. Bartlett, in timing. It's true, this thing
Just
is
told
really.
the story of timing.
This thing is all about timing. In this case, Andrew and I are still working on narrowing down the spread of roughly $2 million across the salary and benefits lines. And we'll work to get that done so that your next financial will look a little better and you won't see all of the negatives in your salary lines, other than maybe subs, because I think we're going to continue to see that subs is reaching beyond. It's not over budget yet, but it's certainly, again, aggressive in its timing. So, were there any specific questions as you work your way through the financials?
Do we know when we'll get all, this may not be an answerable question, when the 13 will be running at all 13 buses? Is there a sense of when we'll get more drivers?
I don't have that answer off the top. It's funny, we were just, I had Nicole actively involved in some of the changes that we made this week for the schedule. By all reports, I think things are going okay so far. But I have carried the buses into your next budget. She was hopeful that she'd be fully staffed the first of the year, and we clearly weren't, so.
Okay.
But I'll work to make sure that I've got a complete report from her for the next meeting.
Okay,
I do just want to say that, too, that we did pull her in as we were trying to, we sent out the communication, was it yesterday? Good, my day's all.
just yesterday.
Just yesterday. Wow, it's been a long day. Just around all the reshuffling we were doing as a result of the snow day and the parent conferences and all the other things we had going on. And it was great that with very limited time, that Nicole was at the table from STA, and that everybody was able to pull together. And repeatedly, as is usually the case, Nicole's answer up to, can we do this? Here's this creative solution to that. We will make it happen. So we really appreciate the ongoing partnership with them.
I had one question. And I've read your memo a couple of times, so forgive me if it's in there and
It's okay.
I somehow still missed it. But 114 extracurricular, what's driving that number?
It is like the salaries of teachers. An increase was built into the stipends that we pay out for extracurriculars, and new extracurricular stipends were added in the collective bargaining agreement. So the value of those, plus the increase on all of them, isn't yet reflected in the budget, so we're operating beyond budget.
Okay.
Although, it's funny, because I made note of the fact that intuitively, that doesn't feel like the right number. It still feels like I might cover better than a half of that, maybe 2/3 of that, but it still feels like I'm 20 or 30 beyond what I ought to be. But again, this
It
is all
seemed
about
kind
a
of vague.
comparison to plan as opposed to a comparison to reality. So I'll chase that so that when we talk again, it either will have been washed away by the new money being added to the budget, or if it stands out, I'll have an answer for why.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, it's great.
any other questions on the financial report? Nope. Okay, so at this point, we'll move on to old business. The first items of agenda under old business are second readings of the two policies we had before us at the last school board meeting on January 10th. Policy ADC, the only changes made was two small typos that were caught, and those have been adjusted. Other than that, this is the same policy you looked at on the January 10th. Again, this was coming off the recommendation of the New Hampshire School Board Association to combine multiple policies into one location, which would be under Section A, and to rename it, as well as to better properly define the various sections of the policy. And the second policy that's in there has no changes from our last meeting, and that's policy JJJ, which is access to public school programs.
Move to approve both policies.
Hope, is that a second?
No, it's a discussion.
We'll discuss after. Yep. Second, Pip. Okay, discussion. Hope?
In line 40, it says, "No employee shall use any tobacco product, device, e-cigarette, la, 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 la."
Yep.
Sorry, I caught this in this second reading. Do we have anywhere in the schools posted that it's a no smoking school zone?
Yes. Yep.
Things
It's
posted up around?
posted on all of our campuses.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. I
Has
just wanted
been
to
for a
make sure
long
for a
time.
sec, yeah.
Yep.
I'm sure I've seen it, I just was trying to remember.
Yeah, and it's in good visible location, so we're
Okay,
covered. Yeah, great
Just have a
question.
lot of subs and stuff coming in and out of our buildings these days.
Good question. Lisa?
I just wanted to ask if you could explain what you explained to us in email, because I think this did come up with the original discussion around this policy in terms of how do we try to anticipate what is the version of vaping that kids will be doing next year or next month? And
Yeah.
I thought that Kathleen Dwyer had a really good explanation, but if you might, I don't mean to put
Sure.
you on the spot, but if you can just summarize that so that people
Sure.
who are worried about that
Yep.
can hear you.
Yeah, in fairness, the part of the discussion on ADC that the board raised last meeting was, could we put some flexible language in there to stay modern with, as products and devices morph and modernize? Could we stay flexible with the policy so that we're not constantly having to bring it back for an edit? And I discussed it with our school lawyer, and while that was an astute recommendation, she said the challenge is, any sort of generic language that we might use wouldn't hold up well in the court of law. So, for example, we discussed, or any other stimulants, which would carry a broad range and would cover us, but there are a lot of things under that that wouldn't hold well in court. She used an example of Red Bull. You know, are we really going to say if a student has 2 Red Bulls, that's technically classified as a stimulant? So what was nice about it, though, is our policy does refer to state RSA. So as that RSA list changes, our policy is in lockstep with it. So it's not, in fairness, it's not always on time with the state, but our policy will mirror what the state is listing as illegal substances in school buildings. So we are lockstep. So if that changes, our policy would not require another edit.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa.
I was
Ann?
just commenting, over the years that when I was in policy, the state quite often would let us know when there were changes coming up. So
Yes.
we got a heads up on that.
So we will get, and that we can distribute, again, both push out to our students and to our teachers. That's a great reminder. Any other discussion? Carrie?
We're doing JJJ also? in the
Yes, yep.
same- I can do it now, or if there's nothing else on ADC?
Is there anything else on ADC while we're at it? Great, Carrie, JJJ?
I'm supportive of this. I think this makes sense. I just wanted to clarify, this discussion for me brought up questions I asked in the budget around use of CTE programs and that we weren't collecting tuition, which was completely incorrect. And I just wanted to address that. As Nathan had clarified with me after, I had read previously the CTE report where it tracks non-traditional students and somehow made a leap of my interpretation that was non-enrolled students taking courses. So those numbers were huge.
Yep.
And so I just wanted to put that out there, but came from this policy.
Good, yeah, those happened to be lockstep at the same meeting, so yeah, good clarification. Any other questions on policy JJJ?
Only the most minute, line 25, that's just an errant apostrophe that we'll strike. Is
Oh,
that true?
yes, thank you, and before participation.
Before
right?
participation.
Thought that was something on my screen.
Yep,
Thank
nope,
you.
it's,
Change 25, okay. With no further comments, I would like to take a roll call vote to approve the second reading of policies ADC and JJJ. Please.
Liz Barrett. Pip Clues.
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport.
Yes?
Ann Walker.
Yes.
Margot Peabody.
Yes.
Nancy Claiberg.
Yes.
Hope Van Epps.
Yes.
Brian French.
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Great.
Great. Moving on to our second order of business, under old business, we presented the draft of the school board goals from our 8/22 retreat, and the minutes of that retreat are included in here with the homework assignment of offering any feedback on those goals so that we could move to approve those goals during this meeting. At this time, I have not received any feedback on the goals. So I would happily take a motion to accept the school board goals as presented.
So moved.
Brian first, any second? Second, Carrie. Any discussion?
I assume the formatting will be corrected before they're posted, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it won't be in that, that's a,
Okay.
yes, great. Great question.
Don't want to make assumptions.
Any other discussion on the presented school board goals? Great, yeah, Pip?
Sorry. What, have we agreed that once these are publicized, that the previous goals that had been identified will still be public but fall under some other name? Or,
That's a great question. Our minutes reflect that those wouldn't disappear, but they would fall under, if I go to those minutes,
Pillars.
Pillars.
Something.
Guiding principles or pillars, I think we had used the words, which we can determine which we prefer now. Pillars, guiding principles. Anybody have a
I think pillars.
preference?
I
Go
think
for
we had also
pillars.
discussed, though, that part of the strategic planning process might unveil or
Right.
other things that may need to be considered, or
Right.
where those do fall and.
So as a
how they're
placeholder
used.
until the strategic
Right.
plan, yeah, just for clarification, as a placeholder, the former goals will remain and we'll change the title to pillars. The current goals are just for school year 22-23, which we are moving to approve this evening, which were formed during our 8/22 board retreat. Great points of clarification. Lisa, comment, question?
Just one quick point of clarification on these. When we had the retreat, we talked about these goals as the sort of short-term goals for this school year that we would use to guide our conversations with our new superintendent around what sort of the top short-term priorities are. And that's still how we're looking at these, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Really good clarification. So it's really, we have aligned ourselves on moving the district forward with the implementation or the beginning and rollout of a strategic plan, as well as focusing on our communication as a district, strengths, weaknesses, priorities, and appropriate timeline for moving communication towards improvement. Okay, well, without any further comments, I would love to take a roll call vote to approve the school board goals as posted in the agenda.
We need a motion?
We had the motion, then we had the
I think-
discussion,
Already
right? Did I do it
tired.
backwards?
Ready?
nope, you're doing great.
No, we're good.
Time.
Great.
School board goals. Here we go. Liz Barrett. Pip Clues.
yes.
Lisa Rappaport.
Yes.
Ann Walker.
Yes.
You're going to be Margot Walker in a second. Margot Peabody.
Yes.
Nancy Claiberg.
She
She
lip
said
syncs.
yes.
She's on mute.
She's on mute.
Yeah.
I saw you, yeah.
Did you give a visual yes?
Give a yes.
Okay, all right. Here we go.
Yes.
Hope and Brian French.
Yes.
I
Very
s-
Nolte.
Wait,
Oh, sorry.
I didn't
I'm
say.
sorry, I thought you
didn't
did.
say.
Okay, my apologies.
Yeah, that's
Go
okay. I
ahead.
thought you were waiting to say Melissa.
Van Ness.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Struggling.
Great job, everyone. We're moving along to item C of our old business. I will turn it over to Dr. McLaughlin to provide us with the current strategic plan update.
So at the moment, where we're at is we had a template of an agreement with an outside vendor that is being looked at, went last week to City Legal to make sure that they feel it's all tip-top shape. And then on Friday, I had some conversations about a few tweaks to that, and I'm anticipating a draft back this evening from that vendor. So what I'm hoping for is a approval from City Legal on the original template, and then these are very slight tweaks. I'd be getting that new draft back to City Legal. I'm hoping, by the middle of this week, end of this week, actually it was Tuesday. So I'm hoping the next couple of days it's done, it's signed, and we're in motion. And the vendor is ready to come really soon to participate. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Hope.
So when do we expect to have committee, and how will they make up the time? Because the original timeline was for signed contract date, established committee, timeline, planning engagement for January, but we're in the last week, so we won't have.
We already discussed, and we're gonna have to double up a little bit. And the hope is we go from starting off kind of in a 3-week hole, we trim off a week in each month along the way, but we'll have to double up on some of the work we're gonna do.
So we're still looking at the same timeline.
Still trying to hit
for
the same timeline on the incremental piece that we
tactical
discussed.
information for the end of this school year.
So I'm being somewhat cagey because some of what we talked about was in non-public, but I think if we're talking about the same thing, yes. So that incremental step being completed by the end of the school year. Yep.
Thank you.
Can you, what's your plan for communicating out once you hopefully get the signed contract? How do you plan to share that with the board and the district?
So my intent would be that we would have the vendor come in right away, maybe at the next board meeting.
Okay.
If not sooner, but I think that initial conversation would be with the board.
Okay.
So.
Will the committee be made of all stakeholders?
I think there's still some conversation to be had about the makeup of the committee. What this particular vendor has done, I think you're going to have a variety of stakeholders on a not huge team. In terms of the steering committee, I think there'll be other opportunities, structured opportunities for a lot of other people to contribute. But I think you're looking at multiple categories of stakeholders on a small team.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the strategic plan update? Okay, great. Let's move on to our next order of business, which is the communication plan. It's been a while, so let's bring ourselves back up. Kind of convenient that these all fell in the same point. If you remember correctly, we established at our August 22nd board retreat that we had 2 goals this year. We would be operating under the goal of strategic plan and communication. If you reference those minutes that are posted in this agenda item, we talked about what was important under communication was the need to identify strengths and weaknesses, prioritize which of the weaknesses we were going to focus on, and come up with an appropriate timeline and tools for improving those areas that need work. One of the ways we established that as a board was the development of a communication plan. So as we've seen, there was an initial draft presented in November to members of the communication team, and then there was a second draft presented on Friday of an update to the first draft. My thoughts on that are, if I look at, how do I want to say this? I think there's some really fantastic elements in that November draft that hold on to those things we discussed in the minutes on what are standards for best practice, what are benchmarks, what are the tools we use, and who are the audiences we serve. So I would love to keep that aspect of the November draft and then use the January draft as I'd like to get a little bit more clearness from you and your listening tour on, of all those buckets that are included, what's the order of priority? And I appreciated the Asana. That I took to mean that is what your internal team would be working on. So maybe what are the general goals under those buckets on how we're going to move towards improvement in those?
So, talk to me more about that.
Yeah. If we look at our minutes from 8:22, we all talked about, I can refer them here, what did we say? Gather data, assess what exists in the district. That has been done. Develop benchmarks for evaluating communication, define district standards for good communication. I think both of those are in your November plan and well-written with good visuals. And I would think those are really good aspects of a strongly written communication plan. Then we talk about developing a basic communication plan. What was one of the summaries in that communication plan that came out of that retreat was this was a small scale look at something that was going to be rolled into a larger scale roll up into the strategic plan. So the goals for this year was let's assess what's working, what's not working. Of what's not working, what are the priorities that we're going to focus on,
Yep.
and what are the tools we're going to use to improve them. So I see parts of that in the second plan. I don't see that specific to Portsmouth in the first plan. So what I'd like to see is take a good chunk of the first plan and roll in a more effective understanding of priorities and tools to that.
What were some of the tools and priorities you'd like to have rolled in?
Well, of the ones that you stated, and I'd open it to the group, you talked about website. Again, I don't know what the priorities are because I haven't been on the listening tour. We talked about use of Parent Square.
Yep.
Talked about building communication. Talked about social media.
I interpret that as with the dates that are set in the plan. Does that make sense? Or like can you just clarify your question for me?
What do
Yeah.
you interpret what?
You mean the-
So you're talking about the prioritizing.
Yeah, what of our weaknesses is our number one priority?
Okay.
What's
but-
our second priority, and what's our third priority?
And I guess when I saw the dates on this plan, that kind of gave me how each is moving forward.
So what do you see as the 3 priorities in the second plan?
I might not be on the right plan, maybe.
The plan that we got on Friday, I didn't see
Yeah.
any priorities. That's what I'm asking about. What were I saw a bunch of buckets.
So I would say the bucket, I interpreted the buckets as the priorities.
Okay.
What, would it be helpful, so if you to take the same, if you take the Asana piece, right, and if you call the subtitles buckets, I look at those as priorities. So do you just need those ranked? What would you?
I guess it doesn't read to me, it reads to me as, here are all the areas of communication in our district, and then it reads to me as punch lists for internal of what they're working on in that area. But I don't get a sense of when we've listened and gathered data, what are the things we're most concerned about, and where are we focusing our energies first? I know from chatting with you, first was building newsletters. And I know, and I read in the thing that principals are sending drafts in advance so that we're more lockstep on timing and that we're more consistent on the information that goes out. So I take that to mean that was your first priority. But I don't see this anywhere in either draft of
Principals. I think one of the challenges, I'm asking questions
Yeah.
because I think one of the challenges is what I want to respond to the board, what the board wants. And I think I continue to struggle to fully understand what that is. So so I had one draft that I felt was more kind of like theory of action. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Why? It was like a lot of, and it was less nuts and bolts. And then in the second draft, I went nuts and bolts. Here are the things we're going to do. Here are the actual tasks we're going to try to accomplish in order to do what I talked about in the cover, which was to try, and I tried to make it as, what I thought was reflective of what the board was trying to do, but to boil it down into one sentence, which was ensure the district produces timely, accurate information that is easy to understand and find. So, all right, so let's keep workshopping this. So, so a prioritization, and at what grain size in
Well, I
terms of
just want-
thinking about a prioritization?
Let's start with this, though. Let's not drill down on the granular. Let's make sure that as a board, we're in agreement that what we talked about on the 822,
Yep.
when we said communication plan,
Yep.
meant we would define best practice for communication, define the standards, the tools we'd use, the audience we serve, and then part of the plan, making it a plan, is what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses? Of our weaknesses, what are our, in this year, knowing that we have a strategic plan, what are we prioritizing of the weaknesses, and how are we gonna push those forward? That was my understanding from the 822 meeting. As a board, when we discussed we needed to develop a communication plan that would be approved by this board. So, Pip,
I think I saw it the same way you did, and to that end, I agree with what you said about it looking more like an internal document that you would use to create a plan, but not a plan that we would present to the public. For instance, brand identity, I think, is something that should be in a communications plan, but this is a generic brand, explanation of brand identity. Our plan, I think, should include our brand identity, our school colors, our,
Yeah.
fonts,
Yep.
or however we're willing to present ourselves, our logos, et cetera, so that that's consistent across all brands. So I recognize that you may not have had time to do that yet, but I don't think this is a plan that's ready to go public. I think this is a plan that lays out what needs to be done, but it hasn't been done yet.
Is the intent, so, I mean, going back to October, I think, I'm trying to think about when I sent the memo, I talked about an internal-facing document at that time. And I didn't receive feedback at that time that said, no, we want an external-facing document.
We didn't.
Well, I guess I'm using the word public, but I don't,
Okay.
I shouldn't say that. I don't think this is a document you can share it to workshop with staff, but I don't think it's ready to go to staff to use as a guide because the information isn't all there.
right.
The answers aren't there. The directives aren't there.
Right.
So it does lay out what needs to be done to get there, which makes sense for you to work from, but it doesn't tell us how to communicate yet.
Okay.
Lisa, thank you, Pip.
So I agree with what Margot and Pip are saying about this, and it was my understanding when we sat with you in November that original draft that you made was a really great start and had a lot of great ideas on it. And I think what I don't want to do is presuppose for you what of all the various things with communication in our district should be your top priorities to do. But I wanted to hear from you if it is the website, which it seems like it is because you've put that in both documents, so that's maybe one of your top things to focus on. Or if it's figuring out what we can do with Parent Square, or if it is dealing with the calendar or newsletters or whatever. I was looking for you to say, these are the things I've heard or I see are the biggest issues to fight first.
Yeah.
And then how we're going to do it. And I think there's elements of that in both of the plans. But I think what I was hoping for and what I thought was going to be the end product was something we could put in the board packet and present at a meeting so that people in our community who've been saying for a long time that they're really concerned about various aspects of communication could see where we're going with it. And certainly the internal piece is very important. Obviously, the teachers and the administrators and all the staff who are going to be producing this content need to know the rationale and the things that they need to do.
Sure.
But I think that the people in the community also really want to know what's happening.
What's the goals? and how are we going to move the throttle?
So my hope was to have at a board meeting, a kind of a little bit more finished draft that could be in the packet in advance so people could see it. And so we could be kind of looking at something that was finished.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Hope and then Carrie.
So I too understood it as you did, Margot, and I think the very fact that we just went over and approved our goals, and one of those goals was around communication and 4 guiding principles, that it's significant that those guiding principles are part of the plan. And so I think the first draft, I've said this, I know, to Zach, but I'll say it aloud to the board, I think was a good catch of information and moving on the right track for being able to identify the principles in which we're going to guide our communication by and measure those by, recognizing who our audiences are. You had identified kind of 4 key areas of messaging, and who might own that messaging. Let me be very specific in saying that, identifying that at a high level, not specifically an employee, but like maybe, emergency stuff might be central office. Again, I'm using that as an example. Maybe it's building heads, but whomever Zach determines, but at a high level information of ownership and assignment. And then identifying what those messages would be as far as the tools that we would use for each of the areas of messaging, right? So, for example, what Parent Square would handle. And then what are the short and long-term goals? Immediacy for, I think that's what you were saying, is prioritizing those. I understood that as well. It's like, let's prioritize what those short-term goals are going to be, understanding that some of this may morph as the strategic plan comes along, but just for the context of this year. And so I kind of had the expectations of somewhat of a timeline. Again, I think in the second draft, it's not so much a plan as it is a example of tools that you may use to execute and implement a plan. And so that can be, to me, shared out in a kind of high level. So, I appreciate that you went into granular for dates, but I think that's more internal for your benefit and your staff, and that something that we would post to the public would be more higher level of like this semester, this month. I too understood that we would have something we could put out to the public, but that it would be a document that could be usable to you and your staff. And when I say that, I don't mean, again, in check section 5, article 1 of the communication plan, but that it would be a roadmap. And so I agree with Pip, and I'll just say this and pass along, but that I do think the second document that was provided is not a green light, ready, go document, even internally to staff, while it again is a selection of examples of templates that may be used, but they're templates that are not specified and customized to our district. And so I think that's important enough, like if you're analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of our district, that needs to be specifically tied to the strengths and weaknesses of our district, not a generalized business document of how it might
Sure.
look. Like maybe that's something you give
Well, I think in all these cases,
someone
it's just tools. So what I was trying to provide you with are what are the tools we're going to utilize to do that analysis? So what does that look like? So if I think what would be helpful, and this goes back to the conversation we had in the first draft, is if the board, I'm clearly having a hard time understanding end product desired by portions of the board, if not all the board. And so what would help me is an identification of a product, whether it's in the private sector or in the public sector, that would be reflective of this is not because I want to steal their stuff, but just so I understand what that product would look like. So in any of your experiences in any of your different industries, an example of like, here it is. This is what this would be. This is the standard of what it would look like. And because I've gone out to try to find those things.
We did provide some of
Yeah.
that in November.
Yeah,
You gave us a Google
links
Doc,
and-
and we linked in the Google Doc several sample communications plans from several school districts.
Okay.
So for example, to look at like setting goals for communication for the year, we linked a sample plan, like for setting up, sort of a way to think about website communication planning, we linked a sample plan. And they may not be exactly what you want to do.
Right.
So is the question that you would like more examples like that for each of the elements of the plan?
Or do you want a specific template? Because can I just say,
Yeah.
to your point, Zach, like,
Yeah.
for instance, I do appreciate that you're trying to show tools, but like, tools could be in a plan simply identified as a few bullets saying, like, I'm going to use the Asana software, right, to manage the plan in-house. I'm going to use templates for branding. I'm going to do, for implementation and rollout. There'll be X amount of updates to the board, but, so it's more of a high level than what you're gonna get in the granular with your execution on your side with what you might be providing to your staff, right? You might provide your staff with all of these examples of the tools.
I want to make sure we get to Carrie and Danielle,
So-
unless you wanted to respond to that first, just because Carrie's had her hand
No,
up.
I'll let people talk, and
Okay.
I'm still trying to understand.
Okay, Carrie?
Yeah, I think, I think looking back at our goal, I think we need to be really clear that and we just voted on it, right? But this does not have a delivery of a plan with X elements or this element. So I think we have to sort that out. I mean, to me, I like all the specifics because, but communication is not my wheelhouse, but project management is. And I'm like, great, I can see where establishing a branding guide, establishing this, optimizing all of these, like I see how all of that improves communication. So I have always been of the mind that our board goal, and looking back on it, it says to me we want to improve communication. And I think we've agreed on multiple meetings that communication has been improved. And yet here's 20 more steps for how it's going to continue to improve. So if the goal was a specific plan, that was not my understanding either. And if it's a standard that I'm just not aware of in communications, I don't think we can come back to that unless I've just missed the boat and everyone wanted had a very specific ask. Because that's not what I felt like. We wanted improvement, and I feel like we've seen improvement. So.
I will just say, in those minutes, step 4, we all signed off on develop a basic communication plan. Step 5, implement the plan.
But it's not on the goals.
But that is, the communication and basic sequences of events was accepted as a goal with understanding that strategic plan will also incorporate a larger communication
Right, in-
plan.
in the
Communication
strategic plan, though.
objectives. No, but then under it, we wrote, here were our objectives for communication.
Right, I.
So
agree
I
with that.
guess
In
it-
the retreat, we were very explicit
Right.
around what the plan would craft.
Would
But
craft.
what we just
Even-
voted on goals is not at all explicit, and those are the marching orders that we're giving to a new superintendent.
The goals that we just voted on do say the development of a communication plan.
It does not.
Yes. It says right here, we therefore find this an appropriate, no, sorry, right here, to create, the school board will approve a plan that focus on communication that will. That is the last line of our communication goal that we just approved.
Right.
So I just want to make sure we are all speaking the same language. I'm going to call Danielle while Carrie finds it. Danielle and then Pip.
Brian, actually.
Oh, sorry, I didn't, Danielle's hand up first, then Brian, then Pip.
So I'm just sort of chiming in as an onlooker, and I'm wondering if part of the clarification is that that you guys are looking for more specific communication, community-facing, saying, here are our current tools, we're redefining what the purpose of each one is, who should be using them and why, and then tagging to that the piece of how are we going to measure if it's effective moving forward? No, okay, because that's what I'm hearing, just
Okay.
as like a total outsider.
That's good
May
observation.
I clarify my,
Yes.
now that I'm.
Yep.
So I guess my piece, and I see that, but then we have 4 bullets, right? Above, we have evaluate and hire we have very specific. And I remember when we agreed upon these, we were clear this was a little different, right? But I guess with all of these, I don't see the plan as a document, as a, this is the thing. I thought that the board evaluation of our superintendent was, do we agree that communication is doing these 4 things? So I guess I don't,
No, that's definitely not what I understood.
Brian, then Pip.
Well, clearly, we don't all agree, but, I mean, I personally thought we were gonna have a plan. I think, let's start now and make it pretty clear. I think most of us wanted a plan, and, maybe we weren't perfectly clear or weren't, I don't recall dates that we put together on some of these things. Maybe we need to do that as well. But, yeah, I think, let's just have some clarity instead of
Yep.
going back and forth.
Thank you, Brian. Pip?
That was actually where I was gonna go to. It's like, it doesn't matter so much what we did before we thought what, but now it's clear that Zach is not understanding what we're asking for, clearly enough to.
Yeah. There goes the
so-
communication, right?
Exactly.
That's why it's a goal.
It's a perfect example. So I think I would like to see us kind of figure out the best way to clarify that, whether it's looking at these examples that have been provided again, or having another meeting with the communications committee that doesn't exist anymore, or, I don't know. It seems like we need to just choose a way forward, rather than trying to give specific feedback in
Right.
this kind of setting.
Yes, and yes, go ahead, Lisa.
So I think that we did not come to a consensus at our retreat in August around the exact timeline for delivering a communications plan. I remember discussing the idea that it would be done by the end of this year, just to deal with some short-term goals. And then we did discuss the idea that we would talk about it during the strategic planning process. But I think for where we're at right now, it would be helpful to just get some kind of a motion out there that says, today, what we're looking for at these points, moving forward from these 2 drafts, is some type of deliverable by some date. And I feel like we're mainly in agreement that we did expect some type of document that could be shared with the public that would give an overview of what the top sort of priorities were for right now.
So, Hope, and then we'll round out
So
this.
from the retreat, I do recall we did set a deadline of November. I don't remember the exact day of November, but it was.
You're right, I misspoke. We had a deadline for a plan by November and
Plan
some
for
things to be
November.
finished by
And
June.
we did raise that it would be a written document plan, because I'm the one that raised concern around that, knowing that we were going to do strategic planning of, is that even a reasonable thing to do, knowing that we're going to also enter strategic planning if we're going to have that be part of that piece, which it doesn't seem like from the proposal it is. So Zach's taking that on. So those 2 things, just to clarify, if we can go back and check minutes, were specifically brought up. But what I'm hearing at this point is it seemed like there was consensus and agreement around all the information you had provided in your earlier document, Zach, around the guiding principles, which is one of our goals, around identifying the audiences, which you did in multiple ways through graphs and otherwise, identifying the 4 key points of communication with our district, and what tools we would use, and then identifying what is currently the strengths that you have found in your listening tour and being here during this time, as well as the weaknesses. And in assessing that information, what is, in your opinion, the best approach forward in addressing those weaknesses and utilizing and continuing to grow out our strengths in the district. That's what I've heard thus far. Now, as far as the project management tool that you presented here in the timeline, I'm all for project management. But I think that's not the high level that we need for an outside plan. I think the project management is something that you certainly can use within your tool from the standpoint of deadlines, and the board can speak otherwise if they want very specific, but it seems like we could have higher level within January, within February, within whatever the quarters or however you have your project management stuff tied up, you can roll that up to a higher level. And then the other tools that can be used for implementing can be shared as, like, we're going to look at branding and we're going to look at using these type of tools for that. We're going to, manage our timelines and timeframes using Asana software. We're going to do X, Y, but at a much higher level, not at a project management level that you'll be using for your staff. Does that make sense? And so that would be somewhat mainly those components that aren't in that first draft.
That's what I'm
Would
saying.
just
So
be
it's just a
added
SWOT. I
to
mean,
that
just-
first
it's just
draft, the
adds SWOT
timelines
analysis and
and, well, it doesn't even have to necessarily be a full SWOT analysis, but really just what's the strengths and weaknesses, right? And what have you identified since you've been in the district? And then how do you prioritize, whether it's a website or anything
Yeah.
else? If you feel like branding, whatever you feel like, look, based on being with my admin team and being here and what I see happening with communication, these are going to be the top priorities. And then this is going to be the tools we're going to use to address those priorities or strategies. Maybe it's not a specific tool, maybe it's a strategy. And here's the time frame, high level, that we're going to be prioritizing those priorities for. And how you get in the weeds with your staff, that's
for you.
That's a project management decision for you of specific dates around that. That's what I'm hearing. So it's really more of a taking some of what you have in your project management, raising it up at a high level, and kind of just integrating in that first proposal.
Nancy.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and a tangible example would be really helpful, extremely helpful.
Well, I think you have a tangible example by what you gave us before. It's just
But
adding
I still don't,
3 categories.
So I've taken 2 shots at this so far, and I'm still not conceptually clear about, like, I'd love to be in a position where I understood just in terms of, again, not the actual prioritizations, not the strategies, but in terms of grain size, being able to look at, again, some organization that has an example in terms of the sectioning, in terms of conceptually how it breaks out
An outline.
what you're looking for.
So can we provide you a template for that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Communications committee
absolutely.
could do that.
great.
So
That
I'm
sounds like a
happy
good
to.
point. So I don't think we need to look at, I think that's what's missing, if I were to speak, and then Nancy, I know you have your hand up. I think to me what's missing is it's not personal to Portsmouth, and I think that's what we decided on, is like, we all agreed communication is a goal. We've gathered a lot of data, you've done a lot of listening. So in the short term, in this 1 year that we have a goal of communication, what can we realistically focus our efforts on, and how? And I don't mean how, step 1, assess how many use, how, like, okay, we're gonna gather data on what's the percentage use of Parent Square. And then admin team's gonna discuss, is that high enough? Whatever, but I don't wanna speak before Nancy. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you. I'm hearing in a bit of an echo chamber, so I'm not sure I'm getting everything that everyone's saying, but I did have some comments that I wanted to make. I think first of all, we will all agree that the communication that's come out since Zach has been here has been a big improvement over what we've seen in the past with the memos, weekly memos from principals to parents and students and the community, and also the Parent Square and all that. I think I like the goal that we've set for this year, that we're gonna have a communication plan, But I also think, and this is something that I've realized, and I don't know if others have since Zach has come, you know, we have a superintendent that came from a totally different district, a totally different state. It takes a long time to learn what's going on in our district, the ins and outs, the staff, the students, the procedures, the strategies, the programs. It's a monumental adjustment, or a monumental, adjustment's not the right word, a monumental task that Zach is going through this year to just try to get to know everybody and know what's going on. I think, in my opinion, and I don't know if others agree, maybe we need to push back a little bit on this communication plan. It's a goal we have for the entire year. So can we let Zach kind of take a breath here, and all of us take a breath and say, let's just come up with a plan by the end of the year, by the time we have our retreat again. I think it's been hard for him because, like he just stated, if I heard it correctly, he's not exactly sure what the board wants. He's not exactly sure what the communication committee wants. I think we're putting too much pressure on him. I think we're putting too much stress on him. You're asking for deadlines and how you set it up and who's going to get what. And I think it's a lot to ask him right now. I think if we could just ask him to continue to work on this, and when he's comfortable, get a plan back to us. But I would say let's give him definitely until August, till we have our next retreat, to come up with a plan. That's just my idea. I think with Zach, I think he's doing a great job. I think, you know, our district is in a good position right now, but it's been a monumental task to adjust to learn about our district, to communicate with everybody that's involved, to get to know the staff, the students, the board. I mean, he's had a learning process getting to know us board members. That's just my, you know, I've been thinking about this, as I'm sure all of you have, and I think we need to lay back a little bit.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
I'm going to let Zach speak, and then Brian, and then Carrie.
I super appreciate what the supportive nature of what Nancy's saying, and simultaneously don't think we have to wait until the end of the year. I just, again, I think once, if I can, and I don't know that I'm just not, what my challenge is in understanding what the end product, the desired end product is. If I understand the desired end product, I'll deliver the desired end product. So, and I think we're talking about giving me a template. It's great. I'm ready. So I've got pieces. You know,
But you
it's
have
just
the
a thing.
information, I think.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
the information, and I
Yeah,
think
so it's just- yeah.
you seem to be, in my view, it seems like you're struggling with, like, how granular do I need to go?
It is totally
And
about grain size.
I think that
Yep.
if we can give you a template, then you can see, like,
That's-
I so
yep.
appreciate what you broke down for your team.
Right.
Yep.
And what you would do for a project management for your team, and put that out. It's very clear, it gives them very good target dates, it keeps you and your admin team on track for moving and improving things in the district. It's just, I don't think that level needs to be in a plan. I think that you can go at a higher level for something that's gonna go out to the district, and,
Sure.
and I would, so, yeah.
But I think the frustrating, I would just say the frustrating part is, I think it's twofold. It was me giving a memo saying, I'm gonna be creating an internal document, not getting any feedback saying, no, that's not what we
Well,
want.
that came to us on Friday night, Zach.
But
The
not this
memo
week.
saying it would be an internal document.
I don't know
No,
what
this
memo.
this is a couple months ago.
No, I don't
No.
So-
know what document, what email you're
I can,
talking
I'll
about.
send it, I'll send it to you. So it's that, the combination of, yeah, I think, well, anyways, I think there's been, I'll
But to Nancy's
No,
point.
I'm going to just pause
okay, I
and just make sure we go around, because Brian's had his hand up for a while. Brian?
Right, I think I still keep coming back to, like, okay, let's move forward.
Yes.
Yeah,
kind of
I agree,
thing. So,
I agree.
For me, the way I think about what is being said about priorities is, I think sets the granularity, that it's really like, what's the low-hanging fruit, what's the big things?
Yep.
Because I don't think a branding exercise right now is appropriate. I mean, you could picture a communications plan that's like 300 pages with a lot of detail in it. But I don't think that's what, I mean, I'm looking for something more pragmatic and practical at a high level that says, yeah, you know what, we're screwing up on our website, or we're doing that, what are the big things that we can, and these are the approaches that we're gonna take, and this is how we're gonna follow it. I think that's kind of what we're looking for. It's not really that 300-page, right down to the detail of, and if branding's important, if you think it's important, then absolutely put it in, but I think, highlighting and focusing on those big things, and I think that's where the priority conversations, you say big rocks a lot, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think that's what I think that's what we're kind of looking for.
Right.
Because these can evolve, right?
And they can be over
get-
years.
Right,
Yeah.
and they can get more depth, and I think over strategic planning, we'll get a lot more depth, or maybe even a different focus on a couple of things, but thinking just really high level,
This year.
obviously, we're not doing a great job, even as the board, maybe communicating either. So, but I'm hoping that we can, I don't know, I'm trying to redirect it a little bit.
Yep.
'Cause I don't want to go back, even
Agreed.
months ago at this point. It's
Agreed.
not super productive.
No, I think
but
at this point, we,
let's say what we really want. Hopefully, we can make it succinct, put dates on it, and make it realistic, something that will be useful.
so Carrie, I'm gonna have you comment, and then Lisa, and then we're gonna wrap this conversation up.
So I think on that note, and hopefully more specific, but I feel like I'm confused. I'm confused at the public-facing piece. I don't think that has been defined well, but I would like to recommend that this conversation go to chair and vice chair to outline it. I do think it would be a good, responsible thing as a board to come back maybe after budget cycle with an outline of this is explicitly what we are asking for in this communication plan, and come to consensus on it. Because even in this conversation, I hear 6 different things that we want. And I think and I just don't want to come to the 5th conversation of this. So I don't know if that's appropriate, Nancy and Margot, to put that on you, but to summarize this, maybe come back with an outline in March, and then.
Why don't we, thank you, let's hear from Lisa.
So I really agree with what Brian is saying. I do think we need to move forward. I felt like, as a sort of similar process, like with the strategic plan RFP committee, we sat down, we identified what are the top priorities as a board. I think with the communications plan conversation that we had with Zach, that Hope and I said, tell us what your sort of top 3 or 4 priorities are based on your observations, because we don't want to dictate to you. Maybe you think that the newsletter is important. Maybe you think that the website is the most important. I know I personally am really I want the calendar, but that's not on your list, and that's okay. I want it to be your list. If you can say, these are my 3 or 4 things, the big rocks that you care about based on your observations, and then what you need from your communications committee is to give you a template to organize that structurally, we can do that. It would take us an hour, because that's something that we do all the time, and we have that expertise. We're not educators. But I would love to be able to move forward by supporting you and giving you a template that you want. And if you're able to articulate, could you say right now, I think from reading this, the website is clearly one for you. You put a lot of time into that.
Yep.
And I noticed this week, for example, I think that's the first time I have ever seen the website change.
Yes.
When we changed the schedule, and that was amazing. As a parent who was what the heck is going on with my kids in all the different buildings, it was so cool to be able to see that on the website. So it's clear you're thinking about it, and you're moving it in a good direction. And I'm not trying to say that's your top priority, but it seems like it's clearly one. Are there a couple others off the top of your head that you could say, these are the other ones that are the big rocks? You've been working on the newsletters with the principals, made a lot of progress there.
Yeah, in terms of the big, I think the big 3 for me, number 1 is what people identified during the hiring process, which was that information from the school district, and specifically people would use the high school as a reference, was not credible.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not timely, so things would come out from kids before they came out from the school.
Mm-hmm.
The school would respond too late to those types of things. So I think that stuff, and then the misalignment of communication from different schools, and different schools saying different things about the same issue.
Okay.
So that alignment and credibility of messaging from the building and from the district is number 1. I think we have
Okay.
taken significant steps already around that. based on
So
what we've got.
consistent messaging across
So-
the schools in the district is one.
Yep.
Yep.
And credibility.
Yep.
Combine those.
Yep, I got it.
Alignment and
Yep.
credibility is one.
Yep. And then the the website is problematic. I think there are, as what should be the default resource for all stakeholders, it is not in the best of shape. And then there's the question of social media, and I'm going to loop Parent Square into social media.
Okay.
Those are the three things.
So that's
I mean,
it.
We can give you a template around those three things pretty easily, I think.
And it's just about
The communication committee.
Well, and I think it's just within that, it is, again, about for the document you want to be a forward-facing document. Just, it's identification of grain size.
Yep, we can do that.
That's it. I mean, the material, whether it's here or it's down in the weeds.
I would say 70% of it's between these two documents.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's just a matter of combining it and organizing it, and if you're comfortable with us as the board members on the communications committee just taking a stab at structuring it for you and then just giving it back to you to finish it,
Why don't you just give me a template?
we can do that.
Yeah.
So then what I'm hearing is our action plan going forward is that the members of the communication committee on the board, Lisa and Hope, will provide Zach with a template of what will be present in the communication plan. How many weeks do you need to
Well, how
deliver
about we
that
bring that
plan?
template back to the board for.
Yeah,
Well, that would go,
One step in between. I think the template needs to go to you as the communication structure of Nancy represents the board supervision of Zach. And then it comes back to the board. We all get on the same page and agree.
that's fine. That is very different from the memos that we've gotten and the minutes that we took at that meeting. I'm really struggling with that. The memo said from you, I will gather my information from the communication committee and then disband the committee. The minutes say, it was noted that the communication committee already has lots of data and established benchmarks, so they will work with Zach on developing a communication plan. So we've already as a board voted on them passing the information forward, which has 3 years of work behind it. And we've established in this meeting tonight some very common themes of what needs to be in the communication plan. What needs to happen is it needs to be a communication plan that's personalized for our district with these details that we've included, and a draft goes to the board. I effectively don't see the need of running back around to the board with a template that needs approval from our already elected members of the communication.
To me, it's pretty simplified. It seems like we've identified from the first draft the strong information that Zach has already crafted that will continue to be used.
Right.
So, again, I will repeat them if we need to, but
I
who's
have
our
wrote 'em down.
audience? What are our standards, our guiding principles? What are the messages that he's identified as 4 key areas for messaging to those audience? What are the tools that are effective and what is not working, which he just identified for us?
Those, yep.
Those things, right? What is he doing well, which I will go back to Nancy's point. He's already done a bunch of things that I feel like, to his discredit, he didn't put in either one of the plans that I think people
It's already
should-
done.
that
So
people
it's-
should be aware that are
Probably needs
changes
to
in
see.
our
Yeah.
district and where to find and see those changes and why those changes may drive other decisions of continued improvement in those areas. And so, to me, he's done the legwork. It's really simple. He's just asking for, give me a structural template.
And plan it.
And then he can plug his work in. I don't see why we're keep revisiting it.
These are the
To me,
last
it's
two
pretty
comments. I hear you.
simplified.
Thank you. Last two comments, Pip and then Carrie.
In the interest of moving this conversation along.
Please do.
I was actually going to make a motion that we.
Please.
That we allow the members of the committee, the committee formerly known as the Communications Committee, to send Zach a template that he can then use to flesh out and combine the two previous drafts and flesh out what we as a board had hoped to see. And then we can,
That'd be super.
then we can review that.
Can
as
Do
we
I have
add-
a second?
Can we
Oh.
add to that motion to copy both our chair and co-chair, both chairs, on that email, should they have any,
Which email?
to the
template.
the template
template?
email, like.
We can share it with,
Sure.
So, to leave,
I'm going to repeat the motion and see if we have a second. The motion on the
Second it.
floor is that, we have a second. The motion on the floor is that the last standing members of the Communication Committee on the board will send Zach a template for the communication plan, which he will use, gathering data from the ones he already has to go forward, and that draft communication plan will come back to the board for approval.
okay,
And the chair and the vice chair will be included on the sending of the template. That was the edit you had, yes. And Ann seconded that.
Put a deadline?
yeah, I
on
was
that?
going to ask, is there a deadline on that it should come back to the board by what date, so that we know what timeframes we're working in with Zach?
I think, let's see, when are our meeting, we have a meeting on the 7th?
February 7th, and then the 22nd, I think it is.
So we have winter-
I think we
We
should
have
be able
winter
to
break and
bring it back to the
budget, so-
board.
February 21st, I'm sorry.
I think that's reasonable.
The 21st,
You have a board
Zach,
meeting on
does
the
that seem
14th.
reasonable to you?
Right.
No, we have a
You
budget.
have a budget hearing.
You're
It
bringing
depends on what the
back
template is.
the plan.
I mean,
Yeah, we're
right?
gonna
I mean, so-
basically
so if
restructure
it's-
it, that's
If all
what
I'm
the
doing
motion
is
is.
I'm taking the 3 buckets, I'm narrowing it down to the 3 that we just discussed. I'm discussing it in higher level terms and then identifying a couple of bullet points that are broad strategies that would address those things. That's a week.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
it wouldn't
but
take
if
us
that's-
more
but-
than a meeting to give you a template.
So,
If I can
If
throw
that's what it is.
another twig on the pile, the current policy around social media prevents us from doing some of this work and being compliant.
Aaron and I are in conversation. APT
okay,
and I are in
good.
conversation.
Yep.
Yes.
So, to bring it back and move it forward, we have a motion on the floor that a template will be sent to Zach, CCing the chair and the vice chair, which he will use to identify the 3 priorities, deliver some high-level timelines, include standards, benchmarks, and audiences, and hope to return to the board by our February 14th meeting.
Great.
Are you comfortable with that motion?
February 14th.
No, not 14th. the-
21st.
the
I thought that,
21st.
but then Nathan corrected me that we don't have a meeting on the 21st, so I was
Oh,
wrong.
is it?
He said,
We have the wrap up of the budget.
Yeah,
You could
I
add it to
feel
that.
like with the
you could
budget
add it to that
Then
agenda.
I would say then make it be whatever
The one
is
in
right
March?
after,
Okay.
March 7th?
yeah, the March 7th.
That's not it.
Like a really long
14th.
time for a,
Well, we have 3 weeks in February because we have a week off
Right.
too,
Okay.
so.
I mean, if I can have done, so if I have a
So-
template and it's simple as we're talking about, then I will have it done well. in
Great.
advance.
So
You
the
can
goal
bring
is the
in a
14th, if it's
Superintendent
done
update
earlier.
if you have it sooner, but why not just
Yeah,
give
so-
yourself
yeah,
a break?
that's
Are you
fine.
still seconding that motion, Ann? Great.
So
Do we
February
need to
14th?
take a roll call vote?
yes.
Would like
For motion,
Wait,
Nick,
did we-
discussion of motion.
I know I'm not
February
technically a
14th.
member of the board. Would it be feasible for me to be included in that conversation as I was previously a member of the communications committee?
I think if you can meet when,
Yeah, I mean, if it's not
Yeah.
feasible for me to. be
I
present.
think all efforts
Yeah.
made to include the student voice
Yeah.
would be fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. And Nancy?
Before we vote, can I just ask what that date was that you?
Yeah,
put on
March 14th.
what?
it? Thank you.
I
Right?
thought
We
you
get to
said,
March
The
14th.
I thought
it
that's
was
the
March
first one.
7th.
First meeting.
February.
I thought he said it was March 14th. I don't have the
March
schedule.
7th. Is
Do
that
we have
our
one on the
first
7th?
meeting?
Don't you meet second and fourth Tuesdays?
I think we do, so we don't. Yeah, so it's the 14th.
Oh, I can give you the
I'm
dates.
sorry, how did we get to March?
Because we only have 3 weeks
So
in
you've got
February. And there's
February
one,
14th
and
and
it's a
March
budget
14th.
meeting. March
February
14th.
14th.
Your second regular meeting would be
14th.
during the vacation.
We have a
Yeah.
school board
There is
meeting on
no-
March 14th.
Okay,
Right.
so,
There is no
so do we,
first week.
So the end date
February
is,
14th
It's gonna
better
take us an
then?
hour to do this template.
So, that's,
No.
February 14th is 2 weeks from now. Are you comfortable with that date, Zach?
It all depends on the template. So,
I think,
once I see the template, I can tell you. I'll do
March
my best to
14th
work for the 14th.
March 14th is the deadline.
the
If it's
latest.
done sooner and it fits in the agenda,
Great.
great.
it's fine. It
Okay.
still fits.
So we'll just
Okay.
have honor before March 14th, and it will be
Yes.
done, but
Yep.
just to be clear, it will be done the week before and in the public
packet.
packet.
Yes. let's move for a roll call vote and move the agenda along, please.
Oh, Nancy's talking, but she's in mute.
Can't hear you,
Go ahead,
Nancy.
Your lips are moving, but
Nancy?
There you go, we can hear you now.
Better.
Did you hear me what I just said?
No.
I
No.
would like to
No.
say that we would have it by March 14th.
That-
If it's ready earlier than that, that's fine.
Perfect.
But I think we're really concentrating on the budget now, and I would like to see it will be done by March 14th or sooner.
Yep, that's what you just
Perfect.
said, perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, all right, I didn't get it, I'm sorry.
Nope,
So,
that's a
great
Zoom
minds work.
challenge. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Okay, Liz Barrett, Pip Clues,
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport,
Yes.
Ann Walker,
Yes.
Margaret Peabody,
Yes?
Nancy Clayberg,
Yes.
Hope Van Epps,
yes,
Brian French,
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
yes.
Great.
Great, thank you, everyone. I know that was a challenging, and it informed our own board of our own needs for communication. And Nancy and I have taken copious notes on how to better structure retreats going forward. So I appreciate the honesty and the feedback, and I will incorporate it. On that note, on feedback,
It's work
it's
to be
8:30, and I'm keeping to a schedule. So moving on to new business, we have 2 leave of absences for consideration.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Both leave of absences.
And I have a second from Lisa. Any discussion? Without any discussion, I call for a roll call vote to approve both leave of absences as published in the agenda.
Zach?
Sorry. All right, here we go, from the top. Liz Barrett, Pip Clues,
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport,
Yes.
Ann Walker,
Yes.
Margot Peabody,
Yes.
Nancy Clayberg,
Yes.
Hope Van Epps,
Yes.
Brian French,
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next order of agenda under new business is the consideration and approval for a single reading of 2 policies. These policies we already had, so I will explain them separately. JICH is our drug and alcohol use policy by students. We know that, or the policy committee met with Sean Donovan at the high school to best understand the current practices that were happening at the high school with regards to disciplinary responses to students with drug and alcohol violations on campus. And it was in that meeting, sorry, I'm pulling up my policy. It was in that meeting that the recommendation was made that under the first offense, for the second bullet under first offense, we've changed it to say a participation in a referral to a student assistance program. And then following that, the meeting that would happen, which was always there, attend a meeting between the student, parent, or guardian or school principal, develop a plan to implement the recommendation as a result of the referral that will be followed by the students. So this was we refer the student to a student assistance program. Carrie listed a bunch at last meeting that exist. That the meeting that happens upon return from suspension goes over creating a plan that student can meet with success that incorporates the results that came out of the referral so that we can guide that student forward. You'll see in the policy committee minutes the number of students since 2007. We are a fortunate district in our success with this policy, but there were aspects of it that needed modernization to the practices we were following. The other changes we made under the second offense, under line 30, we changed the word from shall to may. And then in line 31, we added the word shall to be consistent with the previous. And then we added that at that point, under the second offense, that they would be evaluated by a substance abuse counselor, that would be a requirement under second offense. We've only had one student in the last since 2007, that's reached a third offense, just for historical data. So really, the massive change, this is a policy we already had. The only change was that we would refer, after a first offense, all students will be referred to a student assistance program, and that the results of that referral, what comes out of that, will be incorporated into the plan that we make with the student upon return from their suspension, so that we are partnered with the student and their family on best meeting success going forward. Secondly, there were some small language changes to the second offense and the requirement of an evaluation by a substance abuse counselor. Those are the changes to JICH. Questions? Hope?
So I have a few questions, and I understand, I just want to preface by saying I understand that this policy is written up mainly for drugs and alcohol abuse. But in the essence of past experience with policy and how things can be worded, and sometimes taken out of context by this is what it says, I do have concern around it also incorporates over-the-counter drugs and prescription drugs. And so I'd like to understand the word unauthorized and who is authorizing then prescription drugs or over-the-counter drugs, because I know I have to sign off as a parent, and so I just feel like the current language leaves room for confusion. If a student has permission from a parent to be taking something, but maybe there's been room for error of not following the letter of the law to communicate that to the school, or if a teacher or or just anyone. I just feel like it doesn't allow for room for error when it comes to prescription drugs that are authorized by doctors, but did it go through the nurse? You know, who's been notified? So that makes me a little nervous, and to the point of then what the offense might be if there is miscommunication or room of error. I would like to see line 16 changed from shall to may, because again, it doesn't allow for any room of error. It says basically under any and all circumstances, the student would be suspended, and it may not be for an abusive, alcoholic, or drug-related. It could be some other context of, I don't know, I just know at the high school, every day there's confusion of, you know, or possible confusion of situations,
So,
right?
and
Like-
I will respond to that. We do have a clear policy on prescription drugs and authorization, so we can send it back to the committee with that recommendation, or we can also make the recommendation that we need to link reference here to that policy. We just approved the policy. I can't actually remember the number of it
Who is
a
it
couple
referring
weeks
to
ago.
when you say unauthorized prescription drugs or over-the-counter drugs? Who is
So this
in that
student,
categorization of who is giving authority? So if it's,
well, and that's what the prescription med policy, I can't remember, we just approved it 3-4 weeks ago, describes the process for what you need to do to be authorized to have prescription drugs on you on campus.
okay.
We do have a
or
clear
does
policy.
that also discuss over-the-counter drugs?
does,
And
yeah.
cough drops? Because I remember at one
Yep.
point, like, I had to sign off, right? Like, a
Yep,
cough
it's all
drops, and
outlined
so-
in that policy.
But
So-
again, I would just appreciate if we could relook at line 16 of, for the first time offense, shall be subject to the following discipline versus may be, because it doesn't, which we've learned, I feel like we learned from an old policy that we just took a year to go through.
Yep.
It does not give room for the disciplinary to have
Discretion.
discretion based on the circumstances and details. And as we were told by our staff and faculty, I still have to follow the policy, and this is what the policy says. It doesn't give me any room to use discretion. So
Okay.
I find that a little
Noted.
punitive, and I feel like it's putting us in a position to revisit situations that we've already visited in other policies for a year.
Thank you. Carrie?
I think, you know, with that, I think possibly just, I know we don't want to put policy letter references, but a piece of like as defined in separate.
Just to clarify, are you referring back to that on lines 2 and 3? Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
thank
just to
you.
put as defined in whatever, however
Yeah.
makes sense to you all. And then I was wondering, and I know that we've discussed the student assistance program, but do you recall where that's referenced, just so I can cross-look at that?
That's a great question that I cannot recall the answer to. We
And
had
it's- and we
this.
talked about,
We did.
I
I think
think
the
it was
challenge is,
under
this
that
is, it's a
off-campus stuff.
specific.
It is off campus. We currently, we don't have a LADAC on staff.
Right.
And so the reason why, and Zach and Pip can pipe in if I'm wrong, the reason why we changed it to this was because the other programs that we were referring to had often a 3-month wait. And so to have an aspect of a policy that you're suspended and you have to complete this, they'd be out of school for forever until they could come back. It's an area where it's very difficult to find placement in. But the student assistance program does not have that. Our feedback from the high school was that the student assistance that we are using does not have that gap.
And I will try to find it as we talk, but I guess I would like that specific reference as well.
Defined.
Even if it's general, as within other school board policy or something to that effect.
Okay, good
What do you
note.
think Nick was waiting after me?
Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you might have touched on it a bit, but I'm curious as to why it says shall be subject on the first offense, but then we changed it to may on the second.
And I think that's why Hope was catching it and suggesting that the
All right,
first
so-
needs to change to May. That was a
All right,
great
yeah, because
catch.
I think that definitely makes sense to keep
Now
this
they're
consistent.
consistency. Great catch, both of you. Hope.
Just quickly, is it possible that we can approve this one on a second read so that the policy committee can provide that? I don't know what you're referencing for the prescription drug policy, so I would like to have a chance to read that and read what Carrie is referencing before approving something that is going to reference those two.
So we can take a motion to send this back to policy with the recommended edits and then come back for another reading.
Well, is it possible that we can get those two policy references that you're referring to?
Yes, I think
Those would
Zach's
be
got
sent.
them.
So one is on the reference and two is on something to consider. So the reference, so the policy we passed not that long ago is JLCD, administering medication to students. JLCD.
CD.
And it's titled Administering Medication to Students.
Okay.
And it goes through what, the process for medications to be administered by a nurse or school staff. And then what are the exceptions where a student would be able to self-medicate? And that includes like a EpiPen, inhaler, those types of things.
Okay.
So, and in each of those situations, under the self-administration stuff, a parent or legal guardian would be able to provide written proof of the diagnosis.
Okay.
Otherwise, things would be expected to go through the nurse effectively.
Okay.
So that's the reference. And I was just going to say, too, the thing to be cognizant of is when we name a specific position, you're then locking yourself into, you can't
Yes,
eliminate that position ever.
Right.
Or you can't restructure it, or you can't, it's like you are by policy locking yourself into, we must have a student assistance program
Right.
counselor. So just something else to think about. And that was born
That's
out
why.
of
You're
the
right.
dialogue we had.
Yes, thank
The
you.
dialogue was, I think we had about a state certified, did we start there? Maybe that's what it was
It
in the
originally
law
said
policy?
certified substance abuse counselor, which we've moved.
So we were trying to
The
make it
second offense
a
and the
safer.
first was a more
Right.
likely, still part of that. And as Sean, if you read the minutes, what Sean Donovan was saying is that at that first stage, we're really trying to identify, is this a student with a serious problem that we need to intervene? Is this a student that made a dumb choice? And there is a difference in students, and so the assistance program, he said, has been very successful in siphoning out that information and coming back to the school with an appropriate plan to best support that student.
So-
But that's why we didn't go to a specific position, yes.
On that note, could we rename that generally, like, more of a program, an in-house program that seeks to support students with substance use? Like, does it have to, is that helpful or no?
I'm just trying to figure out how.
Yeah, what am I missing about what's wrong with student assistance program?
Because it locks in, we will always have a student assistance program. It will always be called a student assistance program, where it might be a well-being council or a something or other, you know.
So we wanted to give feedback back to the policy committee to consider language that's more flexible.
Is that what you're saying, Zach? Sort of.
I mean, as long as you go in eyes wide open to the fact that you're, if you were to come to but there's two things with the SAP. One is it's a particular person, a particular FTE position with a particular structure. There's also a particular funding source connected to it, which is a dwindling funding source. I don't know,
Well,
Nathan, what the percentage is
I think that
on SAP
part's-
at this point, that we actually, of an FTE that we.
60-something.
69.7.
Yeah, so it's, but it's a dwindling source. So it's one of those things where, you know, you're locking yourself into a grant-funded thing with the grant that is slowly going away.
But
So
that's on the
that's fine.
certified
You can do-
counselor, not on the student assistance program.
Well, the student assistance program, though, is a specific grant-funded program that it's
Gotcha.
inhabited right now by
I see.
a person part-time as
Okay.
part of a full role. So that's all. I mean, you can just be like, well, we'll have to make sure we keep an eye on that. If we change that position in the future,
gotta change
then we'd
that.
have to change policy. That's
Got
all.
it.
So what I'm hearing as the motion on the floor is that the board would like to send this back to the policy committee with the recommended edits, which addresses the concern about unauthorized in lines 2 and 3, making a referral to policy JLCD, changing the word shall to may on line 16, and considering the language that we use in line 19 on student assistance program. And then those changes with the policies that they refer to come back to the board for approval. Hope.
I don't know if that encompasses what I'm looking for about the authorization, because JLCD does not mention, it's really specific to EpiPens and inhalers. It does not talk about authorization for over-the-counter drugs. It's
I think-
administering medicines to students. So I just want to make
Okay.
sure that when it is taken back, that there is an understanding of
Clearness.
where is that authorization coming from.
I
At
actually
this time.
recall this is a state law, that those are the only two substances that are authorized to be carried on people, which as a provider I've fought against, and it just doesn't. It's a
Doesn't.
state law issue.
Okay.
But good to go to the policy committee
Yeah,
to
let's
check
see.
that out, but.
Let's
that
see
was
where
my
the sticking
understanding.
point is. That's really helpful.
So I'm just looking at administering medications by school nurse or staff. In the case where medication must be taken during school hours, medications are to be administered by a school nurse. In the absence of a nurse, the building principal or their designee is permitted to assist the students in taking medication by 1, making such medications available to the student as needed, 2, observing the students to take the medication, and 3, school nurse may administer non-prescription medication during the day if written instructions or verbal permission from the parent or guardian have been provided. And then there's the self-medication
Yeah,
section.
so it has been, in orientation, it has been communicated at the high school that students cannot, like, even administer a cough drop to themselves, right?
Okay.
I don't know if that is still the case, because I haven't gone to orientation in
Okay.
a while. But I will say this, and I will be honest about that, like, that's crazy. I'm not gonna have my kid leave the classroom to go down to the nurse to ask for a honey cough drop that they can have in their pocket and have them stand and give it to them and go upstairs. So my kids, if
I hear you.
under this policy,
Yep.
they could be suspended for 5 days because their mom says, stick this in your pocket and take it when you need it because you
Got
need to
it.
get through class.
And there's
So-
one
That's
other
helpful feedback. Yes, Lisa.
Sorry, there's one other piece to this that a parent actually asked me about, because many of our seniors are 18, and parents do not authorize their
Right.
medical treatment at that
Right.
time. So there was a
true.
question that came up about, you know, my senior who handles their own medical records. You know,
That's
and I'm not
true.
trying to like undo the whole policy just for that subset of kids, but that's like a substantial portion of the senior class. And so just to consider, do we need any language around authorization when they are
Over the age of
That's why
18.
I'm asking who's
No, I agree with
authorized,
you.
'cause, like,
It's very
At
puzzling, and I-
18, my kid was on the older age of his class. He was still in high school, and I no longer had legal rights over his, like, he had to give me permission to even talk to his
Yeah.
doctor.
Like
So
a senior
then-
who didn't have access to their kids.
I just
like-
want to define, when we're saying authorization for what and who is,
So it sounds to me what I'm hearing is, at this point, we are recommending this goes back to the policy committee for updates with all of those suggestions and concerns. Carrie?
One thing, just for policy to consider, because I do think that the over-the-counter thing is gonna be a state issue.
Yep.
Would the policy committee consider taking out over-the-counter from this policy?
Right.
Just because the punishment, should be, for having ibuprofen in your backpack should be different
Different. Yep.
than heroin or
Yep.
marijuana or alcohol.
Yep, totally. These are great comments, and I feel, as policy committee, this feels a good point to go back to. I don't think we need to have a roll call vote to send it back, but Pitt?
No, I think, I'm remembering now that Carrie said that, I think that on that policy that was referenced, that is why we listed only inhalers and EpiPens, because it was state policy, as I recall. So I think you're right about that, and that's how we landed there. I too was uncomfortable with it because we all want to send cough drops with our kids and sometimes other things.
Yep.
So I think it makes sense to go back. We'll confirm that from that policy we've already voted on, and then
Yep. And go forward
go
with
from
that.
there, yeah.
So that goes back to policy committee. Second policy, under new business. This is, again, married or pregnant students, JIE. This is a policy we currently have. This is a state mandated policy that we must have. So it was simply time to update the language. So it's not pretty language, but we tried to make it a little bit less archaic. So in line, you can see in red the changes that we made, but we, because it's state mandated policy, we couldn't make any changes that would change the intent or meaning, which was really just to fair treatment of these students. Nick, and then Carrie.
Yeah, so I understand we're trying to clarify it. Right now, it does technically imply that the pregnant students themselves will only be changed based on their assessed needs. I think switching "and" to "which" in the part that we changed would
Wait,
fix it.
you mean line 4?
Line 5, sorry, yeah.
Line 5.
Yeah, because it says pregnant students shall be permitted to continue in school without any variation from continuance in regular school classes, and then that clause ends, and then it says "and" shall only be changed, which would refer to the pregnant
Change that to
student.
which. you're
Yeah,
saying.
which I
Yep.
think
Yep, I
just
hear
makes
you.
it crystal clear what we're going
Yep.
for, I think.
Great catch. Carrie?
Two changes, so maternal and paternal is very gendered.
Yep.
And so parental status is a bit more encompassing. If, there's better words too, but they're mouthfuls. And then my other change, as always, is gonna be student's healthcare provider instead of physician.
Oh, yes, thank you.
I have to say that I recall another change that I thought we had made in the policy committee, which was to strike that piece and refer to ADA compliance. Wasn't that where we landed with this? Because that was sort of the purpose of making sure that,
Yep.
that pregnant students had whatever they needed according to the ADA law.
So would we prefer the suggested edit to be changed from physician to healthcare provider, or change the last line based upon their assessed needs as delineated with ADA compliance? Is that what you're saying?
I feel like we might want both
Yeah.
instead of eliminating that. because
Okay,
there's
so
medical needs that aren't
healthcare
covered by the
provider
ADA.
and ADA compliance. Any other comments on JIE? Brian?
Just line 1, married, why is that there?
Thank you, Brian.
Wow,
Bad
how did I
point,
miss
yeah.
that one?
Like the school
Oh, yeah.
of delinquent unwed.
So strike married, and, well, that I'll have to ask if that's a state requirement. That's the
Yeah,
name
I
on the
think that
state.
is-
Really
It actually
weird.
is a state requirement, I think.
I think it is,
Do we have a-
but then it's not referred to anywhere else in the policy, so
Right.
it should probably,
Very
be
odd.
added back, or added to line 2.
But what does it
So
mean?
that
But what is
marital,
it? And or
marital or
mater-
parental status,
But
I think, so,
Pregnancy, paternal, or marital status?
Parental.
just to be clear, to move it along, because I'm watching our time and I know that we can do this. I am taking a motion. I would like to take a motion for JIE to pass on first reading with the edits of line 1, if legally appropriate, drop married. Or line 2, change maternal or paternal to parental. Line 5, swap and for which. Line 6, change physician to healthcare provider and add and ADA compliance.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Second by Ann. Roll call vote, please.
All right, Liz Barrett,
Really changed
Pip
it.
Clues.
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport,
Yes, while objecting to the paternalistic nature of state law. Thank you.
Ann Walker.
Yes.
Margot Peabody,
Yes.
Nancy Clayberg,
Yes.
Hope Van Epps, Brian French,
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. The last policy-related items, if you remember correctly, it was the state recommendation when they devised ADC, which we just approved on second reading, that would get rid of all the other areas where we had a non-smoking and tobacco. So since we have now officially gone through second approval of ADC, I need to take a motion for the removal, or the elimination of policies GBED, which was our employee, and JICG, which was our students' specific non-smoking and tobacco policies. Thank you. Second. Brian, roll call vote. Discussion? Roll call vote.
Here we go. Now Liz Barrett, Pip Clues,
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport,
Yes.
Ann Walker.
Yes.
Margot Peabody.
Yes.
Nancy Clayberg,
Yes.
Hope Van Epps, Brian French,
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Great.
Excellent. Everyone, we are doing really well with our timeline goals. So moving on to committee updates. Lisa, I turn it over to you for the legislative committee updates, and I will get myself on this Zoom here.
Thank you, Margot. So I dumped a bunch of stuff into the packet in the hopes that we could not spend the next hour with me reading a list of 255 bills. If you didn't have a chance to go through the materials yet, there is a list that the New Hampshire School Board Association maintains throughout the legislative session, links to the full text of all of the bills that they are tracking that they believe will have a potentially significant impact on our schools. Right now, there's some 250 on their list. They are working to narrow it down. And as more bills start to have full text and starts to go into committees, they will start to whittle down their list further. I also included in the meeting packet 2 PDFs of the first 2 legislative session webinars from NHSBA. And in those webinars, they really did drill down and highlight a much shorter list of bills that they think may be of particular interest to school districts. In the interest of time, my sense was that having that in the packet was sufficient. I am not personally expert on every single one of these bills at this time. The committee, when we bring things to the board to consider taking positions, would do our homework, but we haven't had that meeting, and our last one was snowed out. So, I mean, is there anybody on the board who would like me to try to read through some of the stuff on those slides, or do you feel like what's in the packet for that piece in terms of the update on bills that we're following is sufficient? Like, I don't want to not do it, but I also don't want to, like, read.
I felt it was self-explanatory and sufficient for me.
Okay. Okay, so the one thing that I did want to go through just really quickly with everybody, and Margot, I think I gave you my slides because my stupid MacBook won't do Zoom anymore.
I get it.
But I put 5 slides in the packet from the legislative committee where we tried to sort of mock up for a fake bill, giving every K-12 student a free pony and riding lessons, just to take the politics out of it, but say this is how we would go through the process of tracking bills and then potentially taking a position on bills. So I wanted that to just be really transparent for everybody and just get feedback from the board on whether people feel like that process makes sense.
Not this one.
I'm so sorry, it's not that one, it is, hang on, Margot, I'm sorry, I
It's
think.
procedures for
Yes,
legislative action.
sorry about that.
Yep, my mistake.
So slide 2 in that, Margot, just sort of shows there are basically 4 steps to this process, and the intention from the committee for at least this year was to slow our roll a little bit, focus more on having consensus from everybody on the board, and the trade-off for that is we're not going to be quick. We're not going to be in a position to run into the House Education Committee this week or next week and immediately start sharing our opinions on bills that are already starting to move through. What's more likely is that as we watch things go through the legislative session, that we might reach a point as a board where if we choose to take positions on bills, we might be ready to have a written statement of support or potentially consider oral testimony. More realistically, maybe by late March, maybe by April, it would most likely be after bills that started in the House move to the Senate or vice versa. So it's later in the process. We're not going to make as much of an impact on the early shaping of things, but it still gives us an opportunity to weigh in if we choose to. And I think also gives us time as a board to be more aware of what we're following and have time at each point along the way. So Margot, if you don't mind skipping just to slide 4. And I apologize for the tiny white print. It's looking bad to me up there now on the screen. But basically, our intention is that any bills that we're tracking, we're putting in the agenda packet, which we did for the meeting tonight. If we reach a point where we have a short list of bills where we want the board to consider taking just a position to support or oppose, then that would also go into the meeting packet with links to the bills. We would try where possible to include whether there is a formal position that's already been taken by the School Board Association, by the Teachers Union, by the School Administrators Association, so people have some sense broadly of where these groups involved in education weigh in on these bills. And so with our pony bill, just as an example, let's just say that was on our tracked list of bills in the NHSBA list tonight. I would consider that having notified people that that was tracked. If we decided to take a position in the committee, that would go into a packet at a future meeting and then come to the board to take a vote. If the board votes yes, then the committee might consider discussions about whether we want to do written or oral testimony. If the board initially says, no, we do not want to take a position, then the committee is not going to bring it back. I mean, if there's some sort of extenuating circumstances where the text of the bill dramatically changes or, other crazy things happen, maybe we might, but we're not going to come back again and say, we're really upset that you said no once and now we want you to say yes the next time, because I just don't think that's the best use of our time. So I guess what I want to open it up to is if everybody feels okay with this as a process and a timeline, if people have questions or concerns. We had consensus on our committee around this, but the goal is to make sure as we're moving through this process that people have a chance to be aware of what bills we're talking about, be thoughtful about how you want to vote. And so we may go slower this year in the interest of building consensus and focus on fewer things. And then in the summer, we can discuss at the retreat, what's the future for this, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I'll just call on myself.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Did you have your hand up?
Sorry.
I don't know.
Go ahead, Hope.
Okay.
Something
In the
is ringing.
essence of time. So I had one question because when we discussed what's the word? I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. Creating this committee, not such a simple word. Creating this committee, one of the, I think it was Brian that brought it up of wanting to make sure that we weren't always taking a stand or, that we are pushing bills one way or the other in our work. And so that the other piece of it was educating the public just about what's coming down the pike around education, how they can reach out in their stance to their own representatives. So I'm just wondering, this is kind of a great timeline, I think, for the board's process and the board's education, but how are you guys educating the public of these bills and along in this process? Because unless they are chiming into a board meeting, how would they? Because I thought that was one of the initial
that is, I think,
goals and
a good goal, and we did discuss that. I will be candid with you, since the school board doesn't push out communication as a board. I'm not quite sure what else to do to communicate publicly through the committee other than doing updates at the board meetings and putting things in the packet. I mean, I'm open to it. I mean, all of that material, like if you had the time, I mean, I know it's a ton. And my hope is as the legislative session goes on, like that list will get shorter, there will be more detail and it will be easier to follow. But right now, it's still kind of a free-for-all. So what you would like to see is maybe, I'm just trying to understand, what would you like to see? Because what we have in there right now is the legislative updates from NHSBA, which have sort of like 1 or 2 sentence summaries of maybe about 50 bills that we're tracking, and that's sort of the stage that we're at right now.
I guess I just want to make sure that we are following all the right to know and being as transparent as we can. Should we find something that we want to take a vote on and it may have opinion in our community that doesn't necessarily align with what our vote is,
Fair.
and then parents come forth or stakeholders come forth and say, I wasn't aware that this
Right.
was discussed, it's not promoted, you know, it's in a packet, but quite frankly, our board packets, they're posted, but go back to some of the communication problems that we have. They're hard to find, people don't know, there's nothing in our communications from any newsletter that has a policy section or that has a legislative section or that has a board news section. So I'm certainly not asking that we create another newsletter in this district. But I do recall in discussing this committee, that was one piece it was going to serve as an educational piece for the public, and I feel like that's kind of missing.
And I do recall that you asked about that when we discussed it, and I agree that's a good goal to aim for. I'm just not sure what vehicle we have other than the public packets. I mean, in terms of complying with public records, putting it in the putting it in the packet as we're going to do is complying, but that's not really educating people in the community. So I'm open to suggestions about that. I just don't know, I mean, practically speaking, what vehicle would we use? I mean, if you have a thought about that, I'm not opposed to it. I just don't know.
I'm not serving on the committee, so I just felt like if that was one of the goals of the committee, if it was being chartered to educate the board and weigh in on legislation, and the other charter of the committee was to educate the public around educational bills.
Okay, well,
So-
you did raise the education component. The motion that formed the committee was not as an educational committee. It was to track bills and make recommendations for some number of positions on bills. I agree the educational component's important, but.
So something we can work towards incorporating.
And if you have a suggestion for how to do that, I'm certainly open to it, but I'm just not sure.
Well, no, I agree with you. We don't control communication in the district, so that's
Well,
not.
I don't know.
our decision.
Lots of
I'm not seeing
questions.
hands, so I
Carrie
don't wanna-
first, then
sorry.
Ann, then Pip. Go ahead, and then,
Nancy's in the queue.
and Nancy.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Carrie.
So, I think too, and this is an overall suggestion of like, I would love to see if if the legislative principles that we agreed on were matched with the bills eventually.
They will be at the point when we're making recommendations for
cool.
positions. At this point, candidly, Carrie, that was my intention for like a presentation, but our committee meeting was canceled due to our snow day.
What a good idea you have.
I know, right? So
And then-
you're right.
and I think one of the
that makes sense.
Big things that happens in New Hampshire, and I'm just putting, I don't know the answer to this question. Do we do background checks on volunteers? Like if it's
Yes.
every person in the
Yes.
school?
Designated volunteers. Let me differentiate. So it's not every single person. If you go on a field trip,
Sort of like
you're not necessarily going to get fingerprinted, but if you volunteer every other Tuesday in the library, you will be.
Okay, so because interesting, I was there for the hearing on HB 107, which was around sex offenders and employment and things like that. But it included volunteers, and it essentially, the concern that came up was that this was going to require anyone who's within the schools who is directly involved, because the schools themselves, their business is to serve children, that every single person was going to have to do it. And so, like anyone in there. And so these things come up. It's like, it's never the thing you think. Like,
Yep.
and it's always just this left field, like amendments and things like that. But the primary ones that, looking on that list, that if it's appropriate, I would love for, Zach, Nathan to comment, was the funding ones, because I don't understand this. I don't understand the school construction and capital improvements funding in the history in the state. So I couldn't at all interpret what the changes were, but obviously those seem like something we would want to prioritize early involvement on as opposed to others.
Noted.
Okay.
Okay. Anne, my big concern basically is the fact that because the powers have changed, the rules have changed, and you can have guns on the floor of the House and the Senate. It's not a rule, it's not a bill, but it's a rule that they make. And when the powers change back again, hopefully, they'll say no guns. But a letter to the editor might be a way to give information.
Okay, good suggestion. Pip, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just sort of gonna respond to the concept of sharing the information. And I think that there's a lot of things that we talk about here that we expect is shared with the public, or is at least accessible to the public. So, I think in the absence of our board actually putting out any information directly, that's gonna have to suffice for a while, unless Zach can figure out a way to incorporate this information into some newsletter, but, that was just.
You don't want to create a new newsletter?
It is not in our bullet points.
Item 4.
Complicate matters, but I like the idea of sharing it more widely.
I do too, and I'd like to think about that, and I think we can talk about it in the committee, and certainly if somebody reflects and has a good idea for how to do that, that's not overly burdensome.
I wonder too if the trigger is really the NHSBA, like, I didn't mean to say trigger after you talked about guns, Ann, but it just can't disconnect it now. If they're saying we need stories, because I think if it's a bill around, students who are disabled or, something, or have different needs in the community, it's the stories that change the approach in the state, you know what I mean? So could you foresee a way where we get something from NHSBA, we say we're gonna put it out through the district, or is that like way down the road?
I think, and
Like
I don't
an
wanna-
advocacy. No.
I love the idea of that, but I think when we talked about this, the intention for this year at least was to keep the scope pretty small.
Yeah.
And sort of see how it works. I think it might, and depending on how things shake out at the board retreat in the summer, be worth spending a little time. It's, first of all, would be, do we want to continue the committee? I hope that we do, but maybe we don't. And then if we do, what changes do we want to make? I think, for example, the city council's legislative committee, I believe there's 4 or 5 council members on it. And I think that it would definitely be appropriate to have more board members in the room so that those initial conversations include more perspectives. The intention this year was to keep it small so that we could be quick and try to at least come up with some processes to start and get it moving. But I agree, I think the communication is an important piece. I'm just not sure what the tool would be right now beyond this. I can certainly take feedback from people. If you think about it, there may be some better or clearer ways to present it in the packet. For this particular meeting, with just the avalanche of bills at the beginning of the session, and this is our first year doing it, I just didn't have a cleaner way to do it than leaning on NHSBA.
Yep.
But certainly going forward, if we expand the committee and there's more, hands to share the work.
Beat out through PTAs in any way, or,
Well,
I don't know.
I guess it would have to be a really special circumstance, sorry.
I know, but if it is something that we feel is important, right, that's coming down the pike as a change that can impact our students or our faculty, if I'm not on the board, that's something I want to know as a parent so that I can put forth letters and I can put forth calls and
Right.
and
So
advocate
yep.
for that change not to occur or for that change to occur,
Use
depending.
social media at all?
So-
Do you have a board?
no,
No.
Do you guys update your website?
we don't have a website.
We don't have one.
Advocacy is not one of our goals,
yeah.
though. Like, that is not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that it raises I think it's a question to take back to the legislative committee to ponder. And what I hear Lisa saying is, as we all ponder it, there's space for feedback there. I also want to remind that Lisa's been very clear with us that this is a trial year. We're going to march slowly. We're going to try to figure out what works and what doesn't work, so we are not going to cover it all. But the second half of that is, there are important things that sometimes fall within the guise of school board that we may not be tracking, but that might be of interest to parents. And the question that we all have to think about is, how do you share that information out in a way that people can read it at their own leisure? The board isn't presenting a stance on it. It's more of this is an awareness piece, a public service announcement of, this could potentially affect your students, and then maybe if there's a lot of feedback, there's town hall, but I overspoke. Brian had his hand up.
Sorry. Did you?
I think Nancy has her hand up after me, too.
Okay.
You want to see the yellow one? Yellow, Nancy.
But yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of making the scope pretty narrow, because I'd like to see how this goes.
Yep.
I voice my worry that I don't want to, have this become a partisan thing, though I think it could be done responsibly. I mean, I don't know how I feel about opposing ponies, but.
Oh, no, I tried. Are you saying my nonpartisan effort failed already?
But I do like trying to narrow it and see what works.
Yep.
I mean, that's just
Yeah.
my thoughts on it.
Nancy?
I just wanted to say that in the past, the board, it hasn't happened very often, but the board can certainly put out a press release or a letter to the editor. Unfortunately, the paper doesn't utilize that tool very much these days, but there is a way that the board can communicate a message out to the community if they want to, via a press release or a similar kind of thing. But remember, our meetings are recorded. They're online, so if people, it's not like we're trying to keep anything from the public, so if somebody really wants to know how we feel about something, it's a public record. So keep in mind that, if we feel strongly about something, there's no reason why we couldn't put out a message from the board, conveying to the community what's going on. The other thing I wanted to mention was, Lisa and I talked briefly about, remember we have at the end of the budget session, when the House and the Senate are ready to vote on the budget, they may tack in a bill at the last minute to try to get it through. And I know Lisa's gonna watch out for that for us, because that can be a hot kettle too. So thanks to the committee for looking at the budget and seeing what amendments are added to that at the very end.
Yeah, 4 a.m, about an hour before they
Great
pass
point.
it. We're on it, Nancy.
And thank you, Nancy.
Yeah.
Great comments, Nancy, thank you. Any other comments for Lisa? Zach?
I'm just curious, I need to look more closely at the city council's group, which I think we have modeled or trying to model in a lot of ways. Do they have an educational component to their stuff, or are they just kind of like, we're...
One of our principals is their education principal as well. So the last one that focuses, I forget how we worded it, I don't have it in front of me, that the one that focuses on the idea of donor town funding models was taken word for word from the city council's legislative principles. Most of their legislative action is focused around funding, which I believe, has, come up in this room as a priority as well. And that's the only education-specific one.
Let me change my,
Sorry.
change what I was saying. So in the, I didn't communicate it well. We were talking about the educating the public component of our group.
Right.
Does the
they
city
have it?
council have a educating the public component, or do they just like, no, we're doing this as a public body, here's how we're acting?
I can circle back with them on that to ask, but generally speaking, their meetings are public too.
Yep.
They have some number of bills over the years that they have stuck on their website where they felt like it was exceptionally important and they really wanted the public to pay attention. But there's not that many on there. I could look on their website. I mean, it's rare. I mean, Nancy, are you? I'm not aware of them doing outreach.
Deaglin does a summary, though, of all their meetings on social media. He
Right, but
does
it's not
do
specific
research.
so much to like the legislative committee.
No, but if there's any discussion or something that they're voting on, anything that they vote on.
But that would
Right,
be
they
an
don't
organized
vote on
vote.
legislative
He'll just
at the
highlight
city
it,
council.
so.
They go straight from
Yep.
committee to Concord, so it doesn't go through that process. It's a different setup.
So
which is-
maybe that's something, in light of, I wrote those notes on what to discuss at the retreat with regards to the future of the legislative committee, but maybe one question there is having a conversation with the city council on, has that question been raised of them? Is there a history there of how they've educated, and just, can we learn from something that's already been happening?
Yeah.
Or models of other districts. I'm
Right.
certainly not suggesting it happen in the short order right now. I'm
No,
just
but
trying to
it's-
understand the.
It's a fair question, and I think it's an
process.
important one to
Totally.
think about. There are, I think I want to say 5 or 6 other districts that have also started legislative committees of some type in the last, many of them this year. I think there was 1 or 2 that were just last year, towards the
Yeah.
end of the year. And we're trying to get a group together of all of those to just kind of touch base and see how people are doing it. So that may also give us some ideas. And I just want to make sure before we step away from this item, did people feel generally okay with that process specific to tracking bills? And I don't know if we need a roll call vote on that, or I just want to make sure that how we're going to go about it is okay, because I want to make sure that that's upfront. People feel good about that before we come back with any bills where we want to take a position. Like, I don't want to start to debate that while we're debating whether we want to do something with a specific bill.
Do we need a roll call vote in the minutes to be able to refer back to, since our,
Yeah, that's.
like, our memories are all different
I mean,
sometimes?
can I make a motion to approve the legislative process outlined in slide number 4 of
Right
our
here?
packet?
Slide 4, this one or this one?
I mean, either one. I think
think this
slide 4
one's
is a
a-
little more specific and
Okay.
slide 2 is a little simpler. I'll take whichever one people want.
I'll toggle. So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, so any further discussion or ready for a roll call
There we
vote?
go. Liz Barrett, Pip Clues,
Yes.
Lisa Rappaport,
Yes.
Ann Walker,
Yes,
Margaret Peabody,
Yes.
Nancy Kleberg,
Yes,
Hope Van Epps,
Yes.
Brian French,
Yes.
Carrie Nolte.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. We are almost there. We're doing it. Policy Committee, the update is you have the minutes there in your packet. I will be adding to the agenda follow-up on the JICH policy with the concerns that we brought tonight, so I will send that back to the Policy Committee. Otherwise, you have detailed minutes. We're following a new format. I hope you're finding those a little easier to follow and interpret the changes that have been made. And that's that for the policy. Does anybody?
Nancy's hand is
Oh,
up.
Nancy, go ahead.
I attended the Portsmouth High School student meeting regarding the Portsmouth 400. And it was a great meeting with Marlon and Julian, and they are working on, as I think I mentioned before, video biographies of prominent citizens in Portsmouth. And they will be housed in our library in the Portsmouth Athenaeum forever. So, 100 years from now, you can look at these videos and see what people were doing in Portsmouth in 2023. They could use some help with editing these videos. So if anyone has any expertise, or if you want to learn how to edit video, they're doing it at PPM TV. So if anyone has that interest, you can let me or them know. I can get the word to them. So, but they're great kids, and they're doing a great job on this project. They also have trees that have been donated to us, to the city, and they're going to be responsible for 100 of those trees. So planting them and finding the best places to put them. The city is working with them on that. So they're doing great, and I'm very proud. We all should be very proud of them.
That's awesome.
Nancy's bearing the lead, too. Because one of the prominent citizens,
Isn't,
very in the lead. She's very humble. She's very humble. But
Snaps for Nancy.
might have seen that one of the little preview our group got might have included a board member as part of the preview.
I was gonna ask, how do you nominate a prominent citizen so we can get Nancy up there?
Guess check that off the
I
to-do
guess it's already
list.
done.
Any other committee
Former
updates?
town manager.
Any other, I know this is a time of year where it's not as many meetings happen because we're in between vacations, is where I was going with that.
I do have an update. I don't know if we want to turf it, but we were approached by Futures about board members. So their bylaws or guidance has one board member. We have been appointing two. I am happy to serve. Currently it's Liz and I, so it just needs to be, I guess, a board leadership decision, but I don't think Liz has had time to get back to that.
Right, so we're on it, but treading water with it currently. But hopefully we'll have that update by the next meeting. It was good to know that we hadn't been following the bylaws. That's for years. Speaking of communication.
The other thing is just be aware, we continue, several of us at the table continue in pair negotiations, and we continue to roll along, and more will be coming soon, but we're multiple sessions in at this point, so.
The only other announcements I would remind everyone is we have a document for posing questions for our budget sessions, so please use it so that we can maximize preparedness going into those sessions so that we can have an effective conversation. And we have a feedback form that's due February 1st. Please make sure you do that.
And one of the couple of documents I hand carried to you today was we're going to refine it for you, but you had questions about mental health services, and we'll say things under that umbrella within the district, and people had indicated an interest in those things. So this is a collaborative document we're working on. We'll, like I said, we'll refine it. There's some things, there's multiple people who are involved in putting it together right now. So we'll try to make sure it's more standardized, and we're also going to attach a dollar figure to these different services. So you also know, like, what's right now, if these are the types of mental health services we're provided in different levels, what's your investment in terms of the overall budget in terms of those services?
So I just want to say thank you for this, whoever was involved in it. I really appreciate it and find it extremely informative.
I didn't get one. Thank you.
Oh,
This is awesome.
Probably.
I got it, thank you. This is really great. Thank you very much for responding to that concern.
I ask a question on other materials.
Danielle had her hand up first, so I'm going to call on Danielle, and then you. Yep.
Mine seems really way less important now. I was just going to do a personal plug for Kids at Lister. We've been discussing ways to get them to really embrace this idea of refinding value in otherwise rough on the outside objects. And so we're starting a elective class, which will turn into a fundraiser that we are pitching to potentially become a new fundraising event where kids are making objects out of found and discarded items. And we will be having a day before Mother's Day. Our usual yard sale is now going to expand to be a yard and craft sale, where kids will be able to bring in some of those skills to talk about their process, but how they also relate to the idea of the process. And so it sounds all nebulous and hippy-dippy, but it's really fantastic. And so the extra plug with that is we are collecting wood furniture, and the kids will be learning hands-on skills. Their big culminating projects are going to be to redo furniture pieces, antiquing and distressing, but looking at that idea of something that was thrown away can now find new value and beauty.
I love that.
Yeah.
That'll be exciting.
And hopefully bring in some funds to help them with their end-of-the-year trip. That's our big push for those kids.
That's great.
Close that opportunity gap, yeah.
I look
Off the
forward to
Leaf
hearing that.
Busters, did you make a lot of money?
We did, and so with change comes change, and so we have ever-evolving interests and commitment to that one particular, so we're looking to branch out and see if this might gain some traction to offer choice. Because what we are finding is that kids really want choice.
Not everybody wants to bust
Yeah.
leaves.
Some really do,
Some do,
and
but
some
some
not
do
so
not.
much. And so we're going to look at what other types of making opportunities, hands-on.
Carrie,
I'm good.
I believe if no one has anything else, I would happly take, oh, yes, Anne has a question.
I'll leave it, there are two, those are two parts of, kind of, once we get into the conversation about the detail, I was looking at metrics, and so there's two different things that I supplied you with, which is around our social media analytics, who is engaging us on what social media platforms, and then I had supplied, as part of that document, targeted rates of increase of people utilizing our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Parent Square apps. So that's what that is, and I had some some targets over the next 2 years around where that should be. And that was that part. And the second was around, the website not having we're still diving into kind of Google Analytics and what Google Analytics can show us in the backside of what's happening with our website. So I just gave you a sample of what types of things we can see, and included, basically I gave you a couple of levels of the same thing, which was to look at a snapshot from basically from July until now of this year compared from July until now of last year. And what is happening in terms of, first it was on the school side of things, which particular schools are people going to in those 2 years in comparison? How often are those things being clicked on? How often are those unique visits by people? And it gives you an idea of kind of like where are people going? And then you can drill down another layer deeper, and I gave you the PMS, an example of PMS, and what's happening on PMS's site over the same 2-year period in comparison to what was going on. Not to necessarily zero in on that specific thing, but to say here's another means of creating some targeted outcomes around what we would like to do around communication. So the Google Analytics on the website would still be to be determined. The other ones were ones that I was putting forward with the idea that they would be referencing points at periodic times for us to look at to see whether or not the elements that were part of the project management approach were creating results that the board can measure and track. So that's what those things were.
Was this part of your superintendent update and we just missed it, or?
No, I had pushed it out as a hand carry, connected with the communications plan. And I felt based on where the conversation had gone, that these were no longer relevant items.
Excellent. Fascinating data. I'm going to ponder those. Anybody else have anything else, or I will take a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Great. This meeting is adjourned. Have a great night, everyone. You. We don't have to vote on that, do we? Oh, okay.
Yeah, roll call. I'm out of space, so I have to go to another page.